Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our management presentation for Repare Therapeutics IPO. I call your attention to the offering summary on page 3 of our presentation. Beginning on page 4 is a summary of our company and an overview of this presentation. We are the leading precision oncology company focused on synthetic lethality. Our lead product candidate is RP-3500, which is a potential best-in-class ATR inhibitor, and as we'll discuss today, it is synthetic lethal not only with ATM genetic lesions, but an additional 19 genetic alterations that we've identified that convey additional response to our ATR inhibitor. Behind 3500, we have a robust pipeline of synthetic lethal-based therapeutics. Those include our cyclin E1 synthetic lethal target and our pol theta inhibitor, and time permitting, we'll discuss those with you today. Everything we do at Repare is underscored and supported by our genome-wide CRISPR-enabled SNIPRx platform. That platform has 2 critical enablers for our company that differentiate us from our peers. First, it provides us with a long-term and sustainable set of targets that are synthetic lethal, for which we believe we can do sustained discovery of new oncology targets for drugs based on genomic instability and DNA damage repair. Secondly, once we've developed compounds against those targets, our SNIPRx platform allows us to identify differentiated patient selection insights for those drugs, to expand patient selection for those drug opportunities, and address a wider patient audience. Finally, today, we'll discuss our financial past, present, and future, and look to our near-term milestones coming out of our initial public offering. On slide 5 is our team and our founders. With me today on this call are Mike Zinda, our Chief Scientific Officer. Mike is a 16-year veteran of AstraZeneca, where he ultimately led the oncology bioscience unit. Mike is an oncology research leader who has been with Repare for over 3.5 years. Also on the call with us today is Maria Kohler. Maria is a board-certified oncologist hematologist. She had a long career in pharma, including an extended period at Pfizer, where she led the development and ultimately the approval of palbociclib. And after a brief tenure at Bicycle Therapeutics, we recruited Maria to be our Chief Medical Officer, which she has been for just over a year now. Finally, on the call with us today is Steve Forte, our Chief Financial Officer. Steve was the Chief Financial Officer of Clementia Pharmaceuticals, which was sold to Ipsen last June for over $1 billion. Steve has had multiple roles in financial leadership at several public and private companies and has the role of Chief Financial Officer today at Repare. Slide 6 summarizes the focus and direction of Repare as a precision oncology company. The pie chart you see on the left represents the entirety of precision oncology targets out there. The red slice, the 29%, represent where the industry and academia has been for the last 20 years, largely gain-of-function mutations, highly targetable targets like EGFR, the collectivity of which has represented a really high impact and large number of very great drugs. This is not where Repare focuses. We are focused on the dark and light gray slices. The bottom 54%, loss of function mutations with no known driver. In a post-BRCA PARP1 universe, there's a broad acceptance that these kinds of loss of function mutations have an enormous potential to deliver new drug targets, and we fish in that pool extensively, as we'll show you today. In addition, gain-of-function mutations, previously considered untargetable, we'll show you today how our cyclin E1 focal amplification lesion has yielded a synthetic lethal target that we've identified and have not disclosed that we think makes for a phenomenal new putative drug target, and we are advanced and expect to have a DC in that program this year. Why are we pursuing synthetic lethality? I think, as I mentioned earlier, the PARPs have proven that synthetic lethality is a concept that has real legs in terms of new drug discovery, and that PARPs are likely not to be the last, in fact, the first of multiple new opportunities. The concept is very simple. As you see in this figure on the left in the gray background area, synthetic lethality is based on the notion that two genes work in concert to make a cell viable. These genes A and B, if we use the BRCA1, PARP1 analogy, in a normal cell, they work together, the cell is viable. If you take a PARP inhibitor and knock out B, the PARP1, BRCA1 still allows in a normal cell that cell to be viable and unaffected by the drug because those two genes work in concert. In a tumor cell, it's different. In the case where there's a natural mutation of BRCA, what you see on the left of the green background square, on the right, as long as PARP1 continues to work, that cell is viable. However, if you find the patient with that BRCA1 mutation on the right of the green square, and you target that second gene with the PARP inhibitor in this case, when both of those two genes that work in concert are knocked out, one naturally by finding the patient with that mutation and one with the drug, you can result in lethality or cell death for that particular patient. And the elegance of this is you can select patients by that mutation and know that that drug will work on that patient with that mutation. But as you saw on the left, for normal cells, that drug is not having an effect. What is most attractive about this approach is that patient selection is intrinsic to this notion of synthetic lethality. And it's our ability to find new pairs like you see here in PARP1 and BRCA1 that allows us to do novel precision therapeutics. I'm going to hand it off to Mike Zinda to walk you through our platform capabilities and how SNIPRx works.
Thanks, Lloyd. So slide 9 is really showing a depiction of the early part of our SNIPRx platform that's used to identify novel synthetic lethal targets in oncology. It starts with step 1, where we look for and identify novel genetic alterations in cancer that are lost or gained, drive genome instability, and are in patient population with high unmet medical need. In the example shown here, we're using ATM genetic loss to demonstrate what we do in this process. So in this case, we take a normal cell, and then we knock out ATMs so that we now have a pair of cell lines, either wild type or where ATM is lost. We then use our SNIPRx CRISPR genome-wide library to knock out all the genes in the genome and identify those genes that selectively kill only that cell that has ATM lost versus the wild type. Those genes then go through a process in step 3 where we validate those further, narrowing them down through a funnel to ultimately come out with what we think are compelling targets to bring forward into a highly structurally enabled drug discovery process and ultimately bring to patients. The key differentiators that we have here is a genome-wide library that allows us to interrogate the whole of the genome. And we've really optimized this over 5 years for sensitivity, reproducibility, and for false negatives, giving us the best chance to find the most targets of interest possible. And through this process, we've shown multiple times that we can find targets that other approaches miss. And lastly, we've been able to find novel synthetic lethal targets to bring into validation from all the screening campaigns we've done to date. Slide 10, we are showing here the original 16 genetic alterations that we picked that are linked to genome instability and that we have actually completed all of our SNIPRx screening campaigns for. 4 genes that are called out are those genes where we have a target in our portfolio that we're talking about in the slides that are coming up. and the remainder are currently undisclosed. But these 16 are largely mutually exclusive with one another, representing different patient populations that cover 30% of all tumors. On slide 11, we're showing how we take this process to the next step. So in addition to using it to find novel synthetic lethal alterations, we also use this to expand out our patient populations that we can treat through a process that we call step 2, or SNIPER-Rx targeted expansion of patient populations. And this is really building off of the knowledge that PARP inhibitors worked in BRCA1 and 2, but clinically identified additional patient populations that they could provide benefit to that had additional genetic alterations outside of BRCA1 and 2. And this process is bringing it forward preclinically so we can prospectively ask that question in the clinic. In this example, we're using ATR. So we take a cell line plus or minus the ATR inhibitor, knock out the genome with our SNIPER-Rx CRISPR genome-wide library, look for genes that, when are lost, cause hypersensitivity to the ATR inhibitor, and then overlay that with genes lost in cancer to identify potential patient selection biomarkers that we could treat. When we did this process, we came out with ATM, the original genetic lesion for finding ATR, but also 19 additional step 2 genetic alterations that represent a patient population to be able to expand out into. We do this not only for ATR, but for all of our programs as we progress them forward to really give us a key opportunity to find novel patient populations, bring them forward into the clinic.
As Mike has highlighted here on this slide, we're looking for a 3+-fold expansion of those predicted responders, and we will show you in our RP3500 example of how we achieve that. But before I leave the platform, on the next slide, we highlight our new relationship that we announced recently between Repare Therapeutics and Bristol Myers Squibb, which is a multi-target discovery collaboration that leverages the platform that Mike just described in terms of the discovery side for synthetic lethal discovery on the identification of multiple oncology drug candidates. The economic dimensions of that agreement are $65 million upfront. That includes $50 million in non-dilutive cash and $15 million in an equity investment, which is in the form of a warrant that will be converted into common shares on the effect of the IPO at the IPO price. The total milestone payments that we're eligible for, in addition to royalties, is about $300 million per program, or $3 billion in total long-term potential upside from this agreement. It is exclusively focused on targets for both small molecules and other so-called undruggable targets outside of our focus of small molecule targeting for oncology drugs. None of our advanced programs that we'll discuss with you today are encumbered by this agreement. And finally, it's discovery only. Repare retains all the rights to its both clinical and preclinical pipeline of opportunities. So with that, I'll move on to our pipeline on the next slide, which includes ATR inhibitor, which is RP3500, that is synthetic lethal with ATM, and as we'll show you today, 19 additional step 2 lesions or genetic alterations that expand that ATM population that we believe will respond to our ATR inhibitor. After the ATR inhibitor 3500 is our cyclin E1 synthetic lethal inhibitor. We don't disclose that target at this time, but the lesion itself is cyclin E1, which is a focal amplification, and the target and the chemistry work against that is quite advanced, as we'll show you today, where we expect a DC this year, and we expect to put that compound into the clinic next year. And finally, Pol Theta is synthetic lethal with BRCA1/2 and additional lesions. That program is about a year behind our cyclin E1 program. On the bottom of the slide, you see 7 additional synthetic lethal targets that Repare is working on that are proprietary to us. And finally, discovery and validation of new synthetic lethal precision oncology targets beyond that, that include things that are part of our collaboration with Bristol Myers Squibb, and others that we retain for our own long-term pipeline. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mike Zinda and Maria Kohler to walk you through RP3500.
So RP3500 is what we believe to be our potential best-in-class ATR inhibitor. What we're bringing forward to treat ATM patients clinically, as well as the step 2 genetic alterations that we described previously in the SNIPE-Rx platform version. ATR and ATM has been validated clinically, and this was presented at ASCO in 2019. We will talk more about that. But we also believe there's an opportunity to move beyond monotherapy into combination therapy with things like PARP inhibitor and other modalities that provides additional opportunity for this inhibitor. We have enhanced chemical properties and as highlighted the step 2 proprietary patient selection insights that move us beyond the space that other competitors are in currently. We're showing how the ATM and ATR synthetic lethal interaction results in cell death. So in this case, ATR inhibitor binds to and inhibits ATR at a stalled replication fork where single-stranded DNA is broken down into double-stranded DNA. This is normally sensed by ATM, and so in a normal cell, ATM is still wild type. It can sense this. The DNA is repaired, and the cell remains viable. However, in the tumor cell where ATM is lost, it can no longer properly sense this double-strand break nor repair it, and the cells move forward and undergo cell death. And it's really this very simple concept that was tested clinically in slide 17. So this was the first time that, in fact, a patient enrichment has been done to identify ATM patients and to test them in the clinic with the BARE inhibitor. And Maria Kohler will talk more about this slide.
Thank you. This is an illustration of a first-in-human study done by Bayer and presented in 2019 ASCO. This patient population was treated with single-agent ATR, and it was for the first time that a single-agent effect was tested in patient population that was enriched for tumors that have a higher probability of finding homologous recombination gene abnormality. Therefore, no wonder that there were a lot of patients who had ATM loss tumors, and those are presented here in shaded bars. As you can see in the small study, there were 4 responders, and the 4 responders all had ATM loss in the tumor. Interestingly, on the right of the slide, you see a spider plot, and in green, the 4 tumors that responded are represented, and the response duration was 60 weeks and ongoing at the time of presentation, which is pretty remarkable for tumors that were previously treated with 4 to 5 therapies. Further, each of the tumors here happen to have a different histology, which tells us that it is a potential multi-tumor opportunity as long as you treat the right patient.
So in slide 18 is showing the culmination of several years of work within Repare to identify RP3500. We focus primarily on potency and selectivity with the knowledge that the more selective and potent the compound is in the kinase realm, the closer you can get to the true therapeutic index of the target and the best efficacy that you can achieve. And we believe we've really found an extremely potent and selective inhibitor. We have a favorable PK profile that allows us to move forward and ask this question robustly in the clinic and have the low potential for drug-drug interactions clinically based on the preclinical data, giving us the belief that we can combine this molecule and achieve the full potential of this mechanism moving forward. It's really these key findings that give us the belief that we have the potential to be a best-in-class inhibitor. And in the next 2 slides, I'll describe comparisons in vivo to the BARE compound, given we think it is the key front runner that's asking the best questions clinically. This slide is showing a colorectal cancer model that has a mutation in the ATM pathway. In this case, we're comparing RP3500 to the BARE compound on a continuous daily dosing regimen at the MTD for both molecules. In this case, both molecules show efficacy. However, we were able to show superior efficacy in this setting. In slide 20, we moved to a mantle cell lymphoma model that has a mutation directly in ATM, and we've switched now to a 3 days on, 4 days off schedule to mimic the schedule that's used by Bayer and was described for the efficacy on slide 17. So in this case, RP3500 and the Bayer compound, both used at their MTD on a 3 days on, 4 days off schedule, achieved maximal efficacy in this model. However, we noted that anemia was a key dose-limiting toxicity clinically, and so we wanted to look at this, the preclinical models, and compare the Bayer compound to ours. And we used hematocrit as a surrogate for this endpoint. In the first two bars, you can see that we show no statistical change in the hematocrit during the dosing period for the RP3500 molecule. However, with Bayer's molecule during this dosing and time frame, we see a significant reduction in the hematocrit to levels below that of aged and sex-matched controls. This and the data that we showed previously gives us the belief that we have the potential to be best in class and to hopefully ask a different question as we move into the clinic. We switch gears and I'm going to talk a little bit about the step 2 genes. So again, remember the step 2 genes were those genes that we found through the SNIPE-Rx process that were also synthetic lethal with ATR kinase inhibition. So here we're showing in blue the frequency of ATM mutations across the different tumor settings in the TCGA, and in green, the culmination of all the step 2 genes together to show you the frequency and how they can expand out that patient population. These mutations are largely mutually exclusive with one another, and thus represent a nice expansion of the patient population, and have an average prevalence of around 2% for ATM and around 10% for those step 2 genes across multiple tumor types. So through this process, we had identified the step 2 genes through the screen. We've done initial validation in vitro, and we've been able to expand this for some of the genes into the in vivo setting, is this data. So in this case, we're taking an isogenic xenograft model. So this is a xenograft model that is either wild type for one of these step 2 genes, shown in green, or where the step 2 gene has been knocked out, shown in purple. When we then treat with RP3500, we only see efficacy in the xenograft model where the gene has been knocked out. This is a dose-dependent response, and it's as good or better than we saw in preclinical models for ATM inhibition. This, along with the remainder of the data that we showed earlier, really gives us the belief that we're going to be able to expand out the patient populations beyond ATM and really deliver additional patient benefit into areas that others are not currently going. In addition to using the step 2 process to look for novel monotherapy opportunities, we've also expanded this out to look for patient selection opportunities for the combination of RP3500 plus PARP inhibitors. In this setting, we've been able to find 4 unique genetic alterations that cause hypersensitivity to this combination. And the data here is the exact same experiment, one with talazoparib, one with niraparib, 2 different PARP inhibitors to show it's not specific to PARP inhibition, in a cell line with one of these genes, either wild type or where it's been knocked out. So in the bluish gray bars is the wild type, and you can see the single and combination agents have very little effect on cell viability. However, in that exact same cell line in green, when you look at the combination, you can see these cells are completely blown away. This is a very rapid and irreversible response, and it happens at concentrations of the drug shown at the bottom that are readily achievable at the doses used in patients. We believe the combination of patient selection and a unique dose and schedule is going to allow us to ask a very specific question for PARP inhibition plus RP3500 and really derive additional patient benefit in this setting.
So before we hand it off to Maria to talk about our clinical strategy, I just want to pause here to emphasize the power of our approach to RP3500. Ultimately, that relies on what we believe is potentially a best-in-class compound, which Mike has illustrated, and better patient selection, which is what Mike has just walked you through, in that 3 to 5-fold expansion of patients that we can select for our ATR inhibitor. And finally, on slide 23 that you're looking at, this actually is what we believe could be, if we demonstrate clinically, a next order delivery on the promise of precision medicine, where patients we select by virtue of a genetic alteration, in this case that Mike just described, we are predicting their potential to respond to a combination of drugs, something we're not aware of anyone else doing today in precision oncology, and overlaying that with insight into how to down dose drugs with known and well understood toxicities. And this is a significant new approach to select patients for response to combinations that now I'll let Maria walk you through how we're going to attempt to understand this clinically.
This slide illustrates the overall strategy. As you can imagine, we are enrolling in this study only patients who have tumors with any of the step 2 gene loss, because we believe, based on our data, that these gene abnormalities sensitize the tumor to the ATR. We are going to evaluate in the initial approach safety, tolerability, dose, and schedule, and we designed the drug to have the maximized potency and specificity. We will specifically evaluate the several schedules, because we know that one of the important aspects of the development is to optimize the schedule. This is a compound that hopefully can be given once a day if confirmed in clinic, and we will approach patients with tumors with genomically defined tumors. However, it will be across multiple tumor histologies. We are going to open the trial globally, and enrollment will start in third quarter, and preliminary data hopefully in 21. This slide presents the details of the clinical strategy after dose escalation and schedule investigation. We'll progress to single agent proof of concept in 3 arms. The first proof of concept will be in the ATM loss tumors, which is to prove our differentiation from the best-in-class or currently agents with ATR inhibition. And the second arm is going to enroll patients with one of the step 2 gene alterations in a specific tumor. This is a novel gene that we discovered with our platform, and we found that there is a tumor with reasonably significant frequency of the alteration, and if our hypothesis is correct, we will be able to approach the regulatory authorities for breakthrough designation. And finally, the third arm will enroll patients with various tumors as long as they have any of the step 2 alterations. This is a very important arm for Repare, because it will test the hypothesis that we are selecting the biomarkers and choosing the population right using our CRISPR platform for this agent, which is a strategy that we will employ for all our other agents. Finally, as you heard before, there is a hypothesis that there is a way to select specific genetic backgrounds in tumors also for combinations. Here we are going to test the hypothesis by combining RP-3500 with a PARP inhibitor. And as illustrated here, we will start the combination very early. We are not going to wait until the maximum tolerated dose for RP-3500 is identified, because we believe that if we are enrolling patients with specific genetic background, there is an opportunity to use the synergy that we discovered in preclinical studies and avoid toxicity that we would create in patients using the standard approach of one of the drugs being given at recommended doses. So both drugs will be with significantly decreased dosing, and we will then confirm that if it's correct background allows the synergy to be seen.
So we address a question we're frequently asked, which is, are these relatively rare mutations, do they represent a significant patient opportunity? And as we illustrate here in a slide we adapted from our friends at Black Diamond Therapeutics, we can see that the ATM plus STEP2 mutations from an incidence level fall squarely in the sweet spot of these kinds of precision oncology compounds that we view as best in class and are having significant patient impact across the board. I think whether it's 2 or 10% obviously depends on what we can validate clinically with our STEP2 genes, but in any event, it represents a substantial opportunity for patient impact and commercial success that could follow. We point out as well that, as Maria and Mike have both covered, in respect of ATR inhibition versus some of these mutations, the potential for combination therapies is significantly higher and represents, therefore, an even bigger patient impact opportunity. So with that, I'm going to move on to the following slide, summing up 3500 and moving to our cyclin E1 synthetic lethal inhibitor. And Mike will walk you through that program.
Thanks, Lloyd. So cyclin E is amplified across a range of tumors where it drives genome instability and represents a patient population with a high unmet medical need. With this in mind, we undertook a SNIPER-RX CRISPR screen, identified a novel target, and are developing that compound to bring forward a drug candidate later this year and move into the clinic next year. This slide is showing the frequency of de novo amplification of cyclin E across indications in the TCGA. As you can see, the top 4 are the area that we're focusing on: uterine, ovarian, and stomach, esophagus, which are the gastroesophageal cancers. They have the highest frequency, and this is where there's a very high unmet medical need. Ovarian cancer is shown in green because in the next slide, we show what this looks like from an unmet medical need. So in high-grade serous ovarian cancer, we've broken down the disease largely into 2 subtypes, that which is HR deficient, so lacking BRCA1, 2, and other HRD genes. These patients respond really well to platinum and to PARP maintenance therapy. However, on the other side, the green, which are homologous recombination proficient tumors, these tumors respond very poorly to platinum and PARPs and represent a very high unmet medical need. And the largest piece of this pie is cyclin E amplification, ranging from 15 to a little over 19%, depending on the data set that you look at. This slide is really showing the synthetic lethal interaction that we found genetically through our SNIPER-RX screen. In the black bars is the wild type cell, whereas in the red bars is the exact same cell with cyclin E1 overexpressed to mimic amplification. When we knock out the gene of interest, you can see that we only kill those cells with cyclin E overexpression. This slide is showing those exact same cell lines, except now using a pharmacological inhibitor of that target. In green is the wild type, which is uninhibited, whereas the red and the blue bars are really showing a beautiful IC50, and these both have cyclin E overexpressed. So the pharmacological inhibition mimicked the genetic loss perfectly. This slide is showing a panel of cell lines that have either cyclin E amplification on the left or a wild type for cyclin E. As you can see, the 2 cyclin E amplified cell lines are hyper-responsive to this inhibition, representing a unique opportunity. We've taken this inhibitor now into the in vivo setting, and what we're showing here are 2 different patient-derived xenograft models. In the first case, there is 4x amplification, so over 4 copies of this gene versus the normal, and 18x amplification in the purple side. In these two cases, we see either a 60% or greater than 90% tumor growth inhibition during the dosing period in these two different models. And this is really representing what we think is a great opportunity for a novel target that, to the best of our knowledge, no one else is currently working on. There's no patents highlighting late-stage molecules, and it's a truly novel agent that we're bringing towards a drug candidate at the end of this year and into the clinic next year.
In many ways, this represents a real triumph, we believe, for Repare in that while there was some academic literature and pharmaceutical work around the ATM-ATR synthetic lethal connection that underpins our 3500 program, in this case, we started with a genetic lesion that we believed was clinically relevant in cyclin E1 focal amplification. We conducted an extensive campaign that Mike's described through to drug discovery, and now we're on the precipice of what we expect to be a DC this year and an IND next year. And in many ways, that's validated the fundamental model that we set out for Repare when we started to build this company in 2016. I'm just going to briefly cover our Pol Theta program. The oral inhibitor of Pol Theta that we're developing is targeted at treating cancers with BRCA1/2 and certain other lesions. That synthetic lethal relationship was initially published in Nature by one of our co-founders, Aniel Sfer. We are at a stage where proprietary structures are highly enabling our chemistry and discovery efforts. It's well known that preclinical data suggests that Pol Theta inhibition is especially efficacious alone and in combination with PARP inhibitors. And we have partnered this program, although it's early preclinical still, with Ono Pharmaceuticals in selected markets in Asia that do not include China, predominantly focused on Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Ono have been great partners, and the economics of that arrangement are summarized in our S1. And I'll hand it on the next slide to Steve Forte, discuss the highlights of our financial history and present and future.
Thank you, Lloyd. So the company has raised $135 million since its formation in late 2016. This was done across two raises, $50 million raised in the Series A that was done in June 2017. Our lead investors, NPM and Versant. And then in a Series B, we raised an extra $82.5 million. That was in September of 2019, where we brought in Cowen, OrbiMed, Red Mile, BVF, and Logos Capital as new investors. Through March 31st, we sat on $83.7 million of cash. That's excluding $65 million brought in recently from our deal with BMS. And this, combined with the proceeds we anticipate to raise in the IPO, should provide us with sufficient runway through 2022. I wanted to highlight a few of the upcoming milestones, most notably an IND filing for RP-3500 in June 2019, as well as a candidate selection for our CCNE1 synthetic lethal inhibitor program in the fourth quarter of 2020. Then in 2021, we have, in the second half, we have two additional milestones, the early clinical readouts for RP-3500, as well as the IND filing for our CCNE1 synthetic lethal inhibitor program. With that, I'll pass it back on to Lloyd for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Steve. And with that, we'll sum up this presentation. And thank you for listening in on the management presentation of Repare Therapeutics IPO